Sir Keir, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. I know you're a big Arsenal fan like me. Is football coming home? I bet you watched last night, didn't you?
I did watch last night, and I really hope it's coming home. Although, you know, having been an Arsenal fan and an England fan for many, many, many years, I know what it feels like to think it's coming home and then it never quite does. But this squad, I mean, last night I thought Bellingham was fantastic. Really good to see Kane getting a goal. They look as if they've got something special and they operate well as a team together. So, you know, I really, really hope they can go all the way. I have to say, France is going to be tough. Anybody who watched a bit of the France game will see Mbappe on absolutely phenomenal form. So that is going to be a really, really tough test for us. But this is a good squad and playing really well. You know, flashes of real brilliance in pretty well all the games they've played so far. So everything crossed as usual for football coming home. Although I have to say, just on this, the Lionesses were brilliant this year. We've been singing Football's Coming Home for I don't know how many years. The women's team just said, well, in which case we'll go and get it and bring it home. So we've got a bit of catching up to do.
Talk to me about a new Britain, which is what you're unveiling today up there in Leeds. Politicians always promising to give power to the people. What makes your plan any different?
Well, this is a absolutely compelling and comprehensive plan. And the question that I asked Gordon and the team to address was, how do we get our economy going? How do we make sure that our politics works again? And I think I strongly feel, and this is what I've been asking Gordon to focus on, that requires us to stop pretending that those in Westminster and Whitehall know far better than those with skin in the games in the communities in which they live. And so I want to make sure that we push power away from Westminster Whitehall, the biggest transfer of power and resource, closer to people on the ground, and that's in relation to transport, infrastructure, skills, education, everything you need to allow the economy to thrive. Because I think the biggest failure of the last 12 years has been the economic failure. It underpins the cost of living crisis, and I don't think that we're going to fix that if we don't allow all parts of the United Kingdom to contribute. OK, we only have a finite amount of time. Give me one example of why somebody in... what difference what you're saying would make to somebody in Hull this morning. Well, if you take Hull, there are businesses being created in Hull. We need to drive that forward. Let me give you some examples of what I mean by this.
Please.
If you go to Dundee, I mean, Hull is a place, I've been to Hull many, many times, and it does need that drive in Hull. The example would be, if you look around the country, there are, at Dundee, for example, video games they've got as a central industry. In the Midlands, you've got ceramics. Bristol and Bath, you've got creative media. We need that in every place. Hull and the North East, I would like to see part of a drive towards renewables, hydrogen off the North East coast. So, you know, that may be an example for Hull. 300 economic clusters is what the report is suggesting, so that there is an economic cluster for every place. But whether it's in Hull or in Burnley or in Blackpool or in Stirling or in Sunderland or Southampton, everywhere I go, the local ambition for economic growth, what they can do, is huge. They just want a government that's alongside them and on their side, and that's what we want to deliver.
Will you abolish the House of Lords, and will it be in your first term?
Yes, we do want to abolish the House of Lords. I don't think anybody can defend the House of Lords. It's one of the recommendations, as you know, in today's report. What we're going to do after today is now consult on those recommendations, test them, and in particular look at how can they be implemented. Because what I want to do, to answer your question, is to make sure that the talking bit, which is how do we now implement this, carries on now. But by the time we get to the election, we can get to the delivery bit. And everything within the report is intended to be deliverable. And the discussion we'll now have is, how do we implement? When do we implement? House of Lords is obviously important, but the central thrust of this is... Well, look, as I say, there's now a discussion about when we're going to implement.
Do you hope it's
when I asked for the report... Yes, I do, because when I asked Gordon Brown to set up the commission and do this, I said what I want is recommendations that are capable of being implemented in the first term. Obviously, I'm not going to pretend that there isn't going to be a discussion about implementing, because if we're going to push this amount of power away from Whitehall, Westminster, we do need to talk to the businesses, the communities, etc., to say exactly how is this going to be implemented, because we're going to get one shot at fixing our economy and fixing our politics, and I want to make sure we get it absolutely right. So I'm not pretending there won't be this period of consultation about implementation, but do I want to get on with this? Do I want the next Labour government to be absolutely delivering from day one, no longer talking? Yes, that's absolutely my ambition.
OK, ambulance drivers, RMT members, nurses, midwives, teachers, Royal Mail, FBU are balloting today. You've been, we see every week when it comes to PMQs, the Prime Minister saying that you're step by step with the union barons. How much can these unions expect your support?
Well, look, I completely understand the pressures on working people in each of the areas that you've discussed or just listed. I think everybody watching this will feel that they can't pay their bills, prices are going up, they're in the supermarket, they're picking stuff up, putting it back down again. So there's massive pressure down on people, and I'm not surprised across the country that many individuals are saying, I need a pay rise. But does that mean I want to see strikes and disruption? No, it doesn't. What I want to see is two things: a government that gets off its hands and resolves the issues that underpin these strikes. And I'm very surprised, for example, when it comes to the nurses' issues, that the Health Secretary isn't getting round the table to discuss and to negotiate what's going on. So that's the first thing I want to see. The second thing is, this is why we desperately need a change of government. We've got to fix the underlying problem, which is the cost of living crisis, which is driven by 12 years of failure on the economy. We haven't grown our economy sufficiently in the last 12 years. That's why I'm putting this report out today, because we, coming into government, will inherit a broken economics and a broken politics, and we've got to fix it fast on behalf of everybody in this country. OK,
but your Lisa Nandy says that we can't afford as a country inflation-busting pay rises. So these unions might want 11%, 12%, 18%. They're not going to get it, are they? And if Labour was in power, you wouldn't give it to them either. Well, look, I think that the government needs to get around the negotiating table. There will have to be compromise on both sides. I think everybody understands that. But we don't want to see this level of disruption. If you take the nurses' strike, for example, under the last Labour government, you didn't have nurses going on strike, and you did have fair pay for nurses. That's the fundamental difference that a Labour government would bring. RMT union has rejected over the weekend an offer from train operators for pay increases of up to 8% over 2 years. What more would you offer them? Well, I'm not going to do negotiations live on air. I do think the government needs to get around the table. For specifics, I wonder how you will get at the RMT to stop going on strike. Yeah, I think they need to get around the table and negotiate. And if you look at, just to give an example of what I mean by that, in Wales, where you've got a Labour government, similar issues in relation to these strikes have been resolved because they've got people around the table. So I don't accept that it's impossible for government to do anything. I don't accept that it's right for the government to sit on its hands. I think the government is sitting this one out. I don't think they should be. I think, with people with the cost of living crisis going into Christmas, all sorts of disruption on the cards, I think most people will be saying, I want a government that's going to get off its hands, get round the table, knock heads together and try to resolve these issues. And that's what we've seen in Wales. It ought to happen here. My message to the government will be get on with it. Yeah, although I did speak to a Welsh minister last week, and they said that they were expecting strikes there as well. Well, many of the issues in Wales have been resolved. That's a fact. Obviously, yeah, but not all of them. As each issue comes up, as they come up, they need to be resolved. These things. As I said, limited amount of time. Is it possible? Let me ask you this, if I may, please, Leader of the Opposition. Your wife works in occupational health for the NHS, as we know. We clap for workers like her throughout the pandemic. But now staff are being blamed for bringing COVID into care homes by the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, and the subsequent deaths of a lot of elderly people. What do you make of his comments in his new book?
I think you've already seen the response of many people in the NHS to that, which is they find what Matt Hancock has to say on this deeply, deeply insulting. He was the man that said, he'd put a protective ring around our care homes. He did nothing of the kind. For him now, having just got out of I'm a Celebrity, to start now publishing his diaries with his version of events, when so many people on the front line put in so much day in, day out. And they're exhausted. I think everybody knows that. It was a huge effort by the NHS. They've come out of that exhausted. There's now a massive backlog of waiting lists, which were far too high before we went into the pandemic, and there aren't enough staff. And one of the things I'm most focused on for the next Labour government is we're going to fix that staff problem, and we're going to train double the amount of medical staff to come into the NHS. The cavalry is coming, and we're going to get rid of the non-dom status, which allows wealthy people not to pay their tax in this country. And we're going to use that to fund NHS staff, because talk to my wife or anyone in the NHS, one of the underlying issues is we haven't got enough staff. We're exhausted. But
I'm not going to let you take me down that route for now, if you wouldn't mind, Sir Keir. I wondered if I could bring you back and ask you about whether you, if you were Prime Minister, would support tagging asylum seekers.
Well, look, I think there's a case for tagging in particular cases, but I'll tell you what I would do, which I think is more likely to fix the problem, and it's two things. One, I'd put resource into the National Crime Agency so we could bust the trafficking gangs upstream, because these gangs are making huge amounts of money.
No, but you would tag some asylum seekers.
We have to break them. But just that's the first thing I'd do. The second thing I would do is get the asylum claims processed, because tagging is something you do whilst the claim is being processed. But no, hear me out, because this is, of all the people who arrived by small boats in 2021, 4% have had their claims processed. That is utter failure by the government. And, deal with it upstream, tackle those criminal gangs, but absolutely get your claims sorted out, because 4 out of 100 cases dealt with for 2021 arrivals, just not good enough.
OK, let's I've got to let you go, but let's end on a lighter note, should we? I saw Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader, of course, showing a video of herself DJing at the weekend. Her choice of song was Set You Free by Entrance. What would your song be?
Well, look, I phoned Andrew, actually, after I saw that video footage and said, we're like yin and yang, which is what she always says. And I said to her, when I saw that footage, I couldn't do that. But she was absolutely brilliant, I thought, and good on her.
Yeah, but what would your song be? Come on, it's easy. Football's coming home. Go on, I'm giving it to you.
Oh, well, Football's Coming Home, of course, already Edwyn Collins' Orange Juice song, but Football's Coming Home would be the great one for now.
OK,
but I wouldn't dance like Ange for that one.
OK, Sir Keir, it's good to talk to you. Thanks a lot.